A nutritional supplement enriched with high protein that is essential for an active life. Maliban Vitagen. Stay healthy for a good reason.
In India, clindamycin resistance is reported to be 90.4% in patients with acne. It's time to stop antibiotic resistance. Start Epiduo, an antibiotic-free topical anti-acne treatment which is a combination of adapalene and benzoyl peroxide. Epiduo is an original research brand with innovative formulation giving the benefit of improved tolerability. Epiduo, an original research brand of adapalene and benzoyl peroxide, has over 47 clinical trials with clinical data in more than 1 crore patients worldwide. Epiduo is available and marketed in more than 52 countries. Also, long-term efficacy and safety clinical data is available for Epiduo. So, for best results in the treatment of acne, start Epiduo.
Check. Just one. So check. Just your mics. A very good morning to all of you. And let me welcome all of you to the second day of the annual Scientific Sessions 2021, organized by the Batticaloa Medical Association. Following a wonderful and an interesting inauguration ceremony yesterday evening that was graced by some eminent personalities in the field of science, today we all are gathered here for the study sessions of the event. The topic of this year's conference being embracing the changes and challenges in an era of global medicine, it is important to highlight the relevance of it to the modern day medicine. Despite the sophisticated level of technology that we have at the moment, yet there is much for us to explore while preventing and controlling the prevalent problems in the field and also expecting to fight against the conditions that are yet to occur. Since all these changes have to be made in a sustainable manner, while going forward with the latest advancements in technology, it is of paramount significance that we get together and discuss about our ideas and opinions for the betterment of the field of medicine and also for the mankind. And in that journey, the Badiklo Medical Association, since its inception in 1972, has in fact been a pioneer in working towards the betterment of the field of healthcare and also for the betterment of lives of the people in the district of Badiklo. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, as the first event of the series of sessions, it is allocated to the Young Doctors Forum. And before moving on to the session, let me introduce the chairpersons of the event. And that is Dr. Arulnidhi, consultant cardiologist at the Teaching Hospital of Badiklo, who is an alumni of the University of Jayawardhanapura, who has done his overseas cardiology training at the General Infirmary, Leeds, United Kingdom, and local training at the National Institute of Cardiology, Colombo. Joining him will be Dr. A. Iqbal, consultant oncosurgeon at the Teaching Hospital of Badiklo, an alumni of the University of Kelaniya, who has done his MD oncology and a specialty certificate in the medical research oncology in UK. And also he has done an MBA at the Southeastern University. Before moving on to the session, I hope that this event will in fact be a fruitful and interesting academic session to all of you. And dear sirs, the stage is yours.
Good morning to you all. I officially welcome to you all to the 48th annual scientific session of Badiklo Medical Association. So I officially declare open this academic forum. So this is going to be, as you all know, it's going to be a hybrid program, and there are locally and internationally speakers, eminent speakers, are going to share their knowledge, and it's going to be a full-day program. It goes up to 7 p.m. The uniqueness of the program, as I said, one is hybrid, and there are time allocated for young doctors to share their knowledge, and there are IT-related symposium, and also, as expected, COVID-related symposium also is a special event on this in this academic session. And we have opened this session for everyone, and the registration is free. If you are not member of Badiklo Medical Association, you can get the membership today itself, and there's a gift waiting for you, those who are attending the program today and those who get the membership or those who are already the member. So with this remark, I welcome you all, and let's start the session. Thank you.
So we are going to start this year program. It's going to be the first program, going to be the Young Doctors Forum. First speaker will be Dr. L. Priyanka. She's a homegrown doctor. She studied in Badiklo St. Vincent's Girls' High School, and she's from third batch of Faculty of Healthcare Sciences of Eastern University. And she completed her MD in Colombo University, and now working as acting consultant physician at Base Hospital, Kalmney North. And she is going to talk on removing roadblocks to a successful aging. Since she is interested in geriatrics, she probably selected the topic, and we are eager to listen to her talk. Over to you.
Thank you so much, sir, for that kind introduction. Good morning, everyone. I feel honored and privileged to be part of this BMA annual session, and I'm very thankful to BMA President, Dr. K.T. Sundaresan, for giving me this golden opportunity. You may wonder why I have selected this topic. As he was mentioned, it's an academic area, but I have selected this topic because of my observation since I was medical student up to now. When I was a medical student just 7 or 8 years back in 2013-14, I have observed patients with NCDs are coming at the age of 50s or 60s. But during the last few years, I have seen many young people, even at the age of 25s or 30s, are getting myocardial infarctions. So there is a serious problems going on, and many other NCDs are prevalent in the young generation. So that's why I have selected this topic to see what are the roadblocks for a successful aging and how can we achieve that. And also the population is growing older and older day by day. According to World Health Organization, by 2041 in Sri Lanka, 25% of the population will be above 65, age of 60 years. So you can see that in this population pyramid. So more elderly people are there, and they are dependent people on the fewer breadwinners available for them. So as we see what is aging, it's a time-related deterioration of the physiological function necessary for survival and fertility. We have prolonged the days or years of living, but the quality of life experiencing this elderly population is very poor. It is not keeping pace with the rapid rising of the age. So just few academic things like concepts of aging. There are 4 concepts. First thing is the chronological age, that is the actual number of years a person is being living. Other thing is the biological age, physiological age, and the social age. We can exert some modifications on this biological and psychological age. So if we see the physiology of aging, it starts from the molecular level up to organismal dysfunction. In the molecular state, there are many things occurring like DNA damage, chromosomal mutation, telomere shortening, and also epigenetic changes. These all lead to accumulation of free oxygen radicals, and mitochondrial dysfunction leads to tissue dysfunction, and finally organismal dysfunction. It is influenced by various factors: genetic inheritance, some personal characteristics, and also other health characteristics such as comorbidities, their lifestyle, dietary pattern, and everything. So what is the impact of this aging? It has a lot of impact on the financial status, healthcare, political influences, and also having influence on the familial structures. So we should be achieving a successful aging. So it has becoming an important area as it's improving the quality of life. So there are various definitions for successful aging. One classic concept is independent, high physical, psychological, cognitive, and social function in old age without major diseases. So the ultimate target is to be functionally independent when we become old. So we won't be a burden for the society and the family, and we will be also be productive in our later ages. So mainly the 4 important domains: avoiding disease and disability, having high cognitive, mental, and physical function, being actively engaged in lives, being psychologically well adapted in later life. Those are the 4 important domains. So as we have mentioned earlier, the biological aspects and psychological factors are there in the successful aging, and these all will lead to healthy, active, and productive aging. That will lead to be called successful aging. So we'll come to see what are the roadblocks to achieve these things. Main things are the sedentary lifestyle and the dietary pattern we are having. So the sedentary lifestyle is having negative impact on physiological function and contribute to many comorbidities: cardiovascular diseases, metabolic disorders, osteoporosis, and psychological problems, and everything. Sedentary lifestyle is an important roadblock. And from this picture, can anyone guess what you are seeing in this picture? Some map with hotspots. This is actually the map of United States of America, and the red spots you are seeing is actually the McDonald's. The McDonald's in USA. The distance between 2 McDonald's is that narrow. So you can see that everywhere, and it's told that it's around 14,000 showrooms, McDonald's outlets are there in USA. And the second and third places are going to China and Japan. As we already knew that people from China and Japan are living longer, but this fast food is influencing them as well. Thank God we don't have any McDonald's in Batticaloa. So what is this? 50 million Americans are eating fast food daily. And there are more than 300,000 fast food stores or outlets in USA. And the mostly consumed vegetarian diet in America is actually the French fries, potato. That's the only vegetarian diet they are consuming, not the other thing. So everything is having negative influence of cognitive as well as physical function. So these are some physical dysfunction due to these fast food items, mainly the insulin resistance, cardiovascular disease, and the psychological impact. These are mainly from this high amount of trans fat and saturated fat in these fast foods. So in Singapore, they have done a 5-year study that is showing among the food consumers, that is actually showing development of insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, and risk of death from coronary heart disease among the people who are consuming these fast foods. And in a study in 2006 done on monkeys, which was, the monkeys were given trans fat, a group of monkeys given trans fat and another group was given unsaturated fat. So ultimately, the group of monkeys who consumed higher amount of trans fat showed that they have developed weight gain, abdominal fat, and signs of insulin resistance. So this is applying to our human population as well. I would like to say a few words about Okinawa, the island of almost eternal youth, that is in Japan, which is almost a land declared as the world's healthiest place, because it's also named as island of longevity, because it has the highest rate of centenarians, the people who live more than 100 years. They are in Okinawa. They suffer from low level of heart disease, cancer, and dementia. So a study done there is telling 82% of the individual were still functioning independently at the mean age of 92 years. At 92 years, these people from Okinawa were functioning independently, and almost 2/3 were still functioning independently at the mean age of 97 years. So you can see in this chart that centenarians prevalence per 100,000 persons. In Okinawa, it's around 81%, and USA, as it's famous for fast foods, only 20% of them are centenarians. So these people, because if we gain the experience of these Okinawa people, we can also modify our dietary system to prolong our life successfully. That's why they have consuming more vegetables, soy products, green tea, seafood, and lean meat, and unprocessed food. They were little processed. They eat usually whole grains and all. So not just food. This is a picture of what they eat. And they are also engaged in physically active life and deep community bonds. So, as humans are social animals, when there is a positive mental stimulation, they live longer with good health. So, if we come back to our own topic, how we are going to remove these roadblocks? First, we have to modify our own diet, our own plate of food we are consuming. Half of the plate should be containing fruits and vegetables, and half should contain whole grains and lean protein. And some foods are showing anti-aging properties. Mainly, these anti-aging properties are coming from these antioxidant properties of these foods. I don't find much evidence for these, scientific evidence for these diets, but these are from the experience-based practice. From various experienced articles, I have found these drugs like nuts, avocado, sweet potatoes, broccoli, spinach, olives, dark chocolates, amla, and I found one review article about green tea, which was published in Journal of American College of Nutrition. It is showing a lot of beneficial effects, mainly from these antioxidant properties. Because of that, it burns fat, boosts immunity, reduce risk of cancer, and increase metabolism, which is being practiced in Japan and some China as well. There are two types of dietary models that is getting its popularity in the recent past. One is calorie restriction and the other one is intermittent fasting. What is calorie restriction? That is to reduce the average calorie you consume without compromising the essential nutrients. So one study is animal study, which is telling that if you reduce your calorie by 20% right throughout your life, you can expand the life expectancy by 30%. It is hypothesized that when you reduce the calorie, you will lose your metabolism. As free oxidative radicals are a byproduct of metabolism, if you slow down your metabolism, you can actually reduce the number of free radicals and the rapidity of aging. So you will live longer. And a study was published in the Lancet on this calorie restriction called Calorie. It's done on 200s of young middle-aged population. It's done over 2 years, and they have restricted 25% of their calorie for 2 years, and outcome was showing reduced multiple cardiometabolic risk factors in young non-obese adults. So the other one is the intermittent fasting. There are many evidence for intermittent fasting. There is an article published in NEJM also. It was done actually by Johns Hopkins medical neuroscientist Mark Mattern, who has found a lot of benefits of intermittent fasting. Improves blood sugar regulation by improving the insulin resistance, increases resistance to stress, suppress inflammation, and improve memory and stabilize the mood. It has many health benefits in obesity management, diabetes mellitus, cardiovascular, and cancer. Benefits are there in them. Because our usual diet contains 3 main meals and some snacks. So while we are consuming this amount of food, we are actually stimulating the insulin and increasing the metabolism of them. So again, the production of free radicals are more. By going into intermittent fasting, we are actually switching our metabolism from usage of glucose into the converting the fat into our energy source. That is a slow metabolic process. It will be having a lot of benefits. You can use this intermittent fasting as 8 hours meal time and 16 hours fasting. There are various methods. One is 16:8, other one is 5:2. That means you eat normally for 5 days a week and restrict calorie for 2 days. And warrior diet, alternate day diet. Some people even eat 1 day meal, but that meal should contain a lot of protein and fat, unsaturated healthy fats. Not this carbohydrate based diet. Then you will feel hungry if you eat a lot of carbs, and then this intermittent fasting method is not going to work. Yes, so this metabolic switch is the main idea of intermittent fasting. So from these two studies done at University Hospital of South Manchester NHS Foundation, it has found that calorie restriction and intermittent fasting shows the same amount of benefit in weight reduction, but this insulin sensitivity and improving of insulin resistance is occur more in the intermittent fasting group than those in the calorie restriction group. The other thing is exercise. So that's all about the diet, and exercise is also an important part in the healthy aging. As we have, our musculoskeletal system changes also occur during the aging. High level of physical activity increase the probability of healthy aging by 39%. There are 4 types of exercise: aerobic exercise, resistance training, flexibility training, and balance training. There are a lot of benefits on NCDs by this physical activity, such as improve cardiac functions, insulin sensitivity and control obesity. And in order to achieve these benefits, the recommendation is 150 minutes of moderately intensity or 75 minutes of vigorous intensity physical activity per week, or resistance training on 2 or more days per week, and they should not spend more than 2 hours per day on entertainment. Adults should minimize the amount of time of sitting. And also meditation plays an important role in the healthy aging. There are a lot of studies on them as well in the recent past. This is a study published in NEJM, and because of it counteracts the stress response. The meditation counteracts the stress response. And the other thing is yoga. It's another area. There are some articles published regarding yoga as well, and something related to gut microbiota. It's an emerging topic in this aspect of healthy aging, and there are studies which are going on rodents, mice, and Drosophila. Among them, they have found that fecal microbiota transplantation is having some role in healthy aging as well. But it is not been applied to human yet, but it is a treatment option in many other conditions such as inflammatory bowel disease and all. So because of the dysbiosis only, we are getting many, because of time restrictions, I cannot go beyond in that topic. So as I have said, this fecal microbiota transplantation is showing some promising effect in the future. And WHO has declared the decade of 2020 to 2030 as decade of healthy aging. So we are in that, we should think now, and we can try to change anything from today. Today is the best day for everything. So if you think, determine today, you can change anything in the future. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Priyanka, for the interesting lecture, big topic in a short time. However, we can entertain few questions at the end of the next lecture.
Well, thank you, Priyanka. Priyanka has done a wonderful work on how to remove the roadblock to a successful aging. But aging is a major risk factor for cancer because due to spontaneous mutation in genetic material. Because of spontaneous mutation which will accumulate and lead to cancer, it's a non-factor. With that background knowledge, next talk will be related to what Priyanka has done. It's about an update on early breast cancer. As you all aware that breast cancer is one of the leading malignancy among females in Sri Lanka and the Southeast Asians. We listen what our speaker going to tell about. Our speaker will be Dr. S. Harish Shant. He is a product of Eastern University of Sri Lanka. He got MD in surgery, at the same time MRCS in surgery. At present, he is a lecturer in surgery, Eastern University of Sri Lanka. In the meantime, he is a senior registrar, the Teaching Hospital, Bettikula. It's over to you, Hari Krishan.
Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction, sir. So it's a privilege to deliver a speech in this forum. I have been here as a medical student from my medical student period, so this is the first time I am coming to this forum as a speaker. So thank you so much, Sundaresan sir, for that wonderful opportunity. So I chose this topic as it is very much important in our setup. So I will explain one by one. So I'm going to give an update on early breast cancer. So with breast cancer, shall I still keep my breast? This is the common doubt in our community. So this lecture will give an answer to this question. So as we all know, it is one of the most common type of cancer among women, and that is the second most common cause of cancer deaths among women. And according to the guidelines in the management of this early breast cancer, it is rapidly evolving, and we have noticed so many changes in the management of early breast cancer over the last 40 years. So what is early breast cancer? So we all know, according to TNM classification, we can stage breast cancer. So according to that, according to the available management option, it can be further classified into 4 classes: stage 0, stage 1, 2, 3 and 4. So this stage 1 and 2 comes under the category of early breast cancer because the management options are something different from the stage 0, 3 and 4. So stage 1 and 2 means tumor size should be less than 5 centimeter and it should be an N1 disease. And some people have categorized T3 tumors, that is more than 5 centimeter, with N0 disease also to this early breast cancer category. But I don't want to complicate that. So stage 1 and 2 comes under this early breast cancer category. So how I am going to work in the pre-operative period of early breast cancer patient. So as we all know, first thing is to go for a triple assessment, which is composed of clinical assessment and radiological assessment and pathological assessment. So clinical assessment will be composed of history examination, and radiologically, before that we do the basic investigations, full blood count and liver functions and alkaline phosphatase, just to see any evidence of liver metastasis and bone metastasis. And we'll go for radiological diagnosis. So for the radiological assessment, the best choice of investigation is bilateral mammogram, and it should be combined with ultrasound scan. So because in ultrasound scan only we can differentiate cystic lesions from the solid lesions. So mammogram should be combined with ultrasound scan. Always in our setup we are a little bit away from these guidelines because we are used to do ultrasound scan because of limited resources and resource persons, and so we have to upgrade our practice. So diagnosis should be made with the use of bilateral mammogram, and it should be we have to do that with an ultrasound scan. Both we have to do. That's according to the NCCN guideline. And then MRI is an optional one, so there are special indications for that, so it's optional, so I'm not going to talk about that. Then comes the pathological diagnosis. So the pathological assessment is composed of true cut biopsy. So I will talk about this also, because in our setup we also used to practice FNAC rather true cut biopsy. So I would like to explain why we have to do true cut biopsy rather FNAC. I will do it in the next slide. Then when the patient is at a risk of hereditary cancer, we have to do the genetic counseling, and also if she is a premenopausal woman, you have to do a fertility counseling. And also you have to assess the psychological stress of this patient. So other than that, in stage 1 and 2B patients, so this early breast cancer patient, only if there are any evidence of metastasis, you will go for further investigations. Otherwise, you don't need any investigation. So, for example, if the patient complains of a back pain suggestive of a bone metastasis, you can go for a bone scan. And any features examination finding suggestive of a liver met, you can go for a abdominal CT. And also any lung signs, you can go for a chest CT. Otherwise, you don't need to go for a metastatic screening in breast cancer patients. And tumor marker doesn't have any role in the preoperative work of breast cancer. So, as I mentioned earlier, why we have to do true cut biopsies. So what are the advantages in true cut biopsies? There are two advantages. One thing, you can confirm the invasive malignancy. You can't confirm the invasive malignancy with your FNAC. FNAC just gives the results, then whether it's malignant or not. And the second thing is, it provides tissue for the immunohistochemistry. Why immunohistochemistry is important is, so immunohistochemistry is a study we use to assess the receptor status of the tumor. Because receptor status decides so many things. So the receptors that we are assessing here is ER, PR, HER2-neu and Ki67. So these four receptors decides the management itself. So it plays a major role in deciding whether to give neoadjuvant or not, and also what agent we have to give and what dose we have to give, everything, and the prognosis also you can determine by this immunohistochemistry. So that's why true cut is recommended upon FNAC. So we have to move towards true cuts rather doing FNACs in our setup. So as I mentioned, so it decides the management options. Then we come to the management. So management, as all the rest of the malignancies, it's also a multidisciplinary team approach. So that team comprises surgeon, clinical oncologist, radiologist, and pathologist. So for breast cancer, Health Ministry has released a guideline in 2021. This is the recent guideline regarding the management of early breast cancer and locally advanced breast cancer. So according to that, we are having about more than 25 clinical oncologists in our country. So there is almost one clinical oncologist per district. So what they recommend is, please encourage having multidisciplinary team meetings in regard to malignancies every week. So I also, it's a good forum to make a suggestion to Iqbal sir. He is the one who is organizing MDT meetings in Batticaloa Teaching Hospital. It's a small suggestion for you, sir, to incorporate other peripheral hospitals also in this multidisciplinary team meetings. It will be very much beneficial for them. So when we take the management, it can be classified into the management of breast and management of axilla. And before going for the management, we have to decide whether to give neoadjuvant or not. So with or without neoadjuvant, we are going to go for the specific management. So first we will see the management of breast. So he is the one who invented mastectomy, which was a radical mastectomy. Earlier they performed, and after so much of evolution, now what we practice is, the management of breast can be classified into primary breast surgery and reconstruction. So primary breast surgery, either it can be breast conservative surgery, that means wide local excision, or mastectomy. And then comes the reconstruction. We will see one by one. So you can see this picture, and it shows the difference between breast conservative surgery and mastectomy. So you can see the vast difference between these two pictures. So you may think that if we are going for a wide local excision or breast conservative surgery, what's the margin we should excise? So the patient also will get agitated for a malignancy, why I am keeping this breast. But according to various studies performed in this, what they recommend is just 1 millimeter margin for invasive malignancy and 2 millimeter margin for ductal carcinoma in situ is enough. And according to the NCCN recommendation, what they recommend is no ink on tumor. So what that means is, you will be, the pathologist will be applying ink over the specimen you give them, and they will make the cut-up. And in the cut-up, if the tumor is not stained with ink, so that margin is more than enough. So 1 millimeter is a small thing. So that margin is proven, that is more than enough for the oncological clearance. So, but you can't perform this breast conservative surgery in all kind of patients. There are contraindications for breast conservative surgery or wide local excision. So in that patients, you need mastectomy. So the contraindications for this breast conservative surgery are diffuse microcalcification and multicentric disease, inflammatory breast cancers, and tumor breast size ratios. And with oncoplastic technique, it also coming under relative contraindication. And also, if the patient is having contraindication for adjuvant radiotherapy, because all the patients who are undergoing breast conservative surgery should undergo radiotherapy. So, if the patient is having any contraindication for radiotherapy, such as if he has undergone already radiation resist, it's not possible to give radiotherapy. So, it's not possible to go for a breast conservative surgery. So, what about Sri Lanka? In our setup, what's happening? So, according to that guideline which was published in 2021, they have mentioned that unfortunately, we are not doing breast conservation in an adequate amount. So, they have performed a retrospective audit which shows out of 200 mastectomies done, in which 70% of the cases may have been suitable for breast conservation. So then comes the reconstruction of the breast. So reconstruction of the breast, either it can be done using implants or flap reconstruction. So flap, either it can be a free flap or a pedicle flap. So a pedicle flap means you will be rotating one part from another part of the body. You will be rotating tissue from another part. And free flap means you will be totally mobilizing a part with a vascular pedicle, and you will be anastomosing that to the mastectomy done area. So these are few pictures which shows the reconstructions. So you can see this is one of the Grisoti flap. So and this is VY mammoplasty, and this is after application of implants. And this is also oncoplastic reduction. So there are various techniques available. I don't want to go in detail. After that, we will move to the management of axilla. So why you are more concerned about the management of axilla is because the node's status determines the stage of the disease and also predicts the outcome. And also it influences the adjuvant therapy options. According to the node status, they will decide on the chemotherapy and the anti-estrogen and the hormonal therapy, and what is the drug of choice we are going to use, and what's the dose we are going to use, and how we are going to give the radiotherapy. Those things are influenced by the nodal status. Because of that, the assessment of axillary lymph node is very much important. Because in early breast cancer also, people can present with positive lymph nodes. And the other problem is when you go for extensive procedure in axilla. For example, if you clear all the lymph nodes in axilla with axillary dissection, it will lead to a high rate of lymphedema, paresthesia, and shoulder dysfunction. So these kind of complications also associating with axillary dissection. So at the same time, it is not going to provide any benefit in case of node negative patients. So we have to pick up the patient who needs axillary clearance, and you have to identify the patient who doesn't need axillary clearance. So the axillary management can be classified into axillary lymph node dissection and sentinel lymph node dissection. So most of the early breast cancers and node negative disease in triple assessment. So when you are clinically palpating, there are no lymph nodes. At the same time, you are radiologically assessing, there also you can't detect any lymph node. Then you have to go for a sentinel lymph node biopsy. Earlier, it was not available in our hospital, but recently there was a fruitful discussion between our oncologists and surgeons and oncosurgeons and the pathologist, and they have started doing sentinel lymph node biopsy. So that's a good news. So hereafter, we will be able to do sentinel lymph node biopsies. So how we do sentinel lymph node biopsy is, the standard technique is to do with dual tracer technique. So what we do is, we will be injecting a dye called patent blue, but it is not available in our country. So what we use is methylene blue. we'll be injecting into the tumor complex, or some people inject to the nipple areola complex also. And it will be radio labeled, and you can detect the emission with the gamma camera. That is called dual tracer technique, but it's also not available in our country. So we use methylene blue, and we use the stained lymph node and send it for the histological assessment. At the same time, we do the wide local excision. At that time, report comes. So if it's positive, we will go ahead with axillary clearance. If it's negative, you don't need to go for axillary clearance. So it has been proven by trial, NSA-BP B32 trial, that has proven that sentinel lymph node biopsy alone is safe, appropriate, and effective. And I want to skip some slides. Okay. So after treatment of axilla, we should concern about the post-treatment surveillance. So after the specific management, we have to go for a regular history examination, and mammography is recommended. So we will be performing these every 3 to 6 months for first 3 years, and 6 to 12 months for 4th and 5th year, and annually after 5 years. So if the patient has undergone breast conservative surgery, after finishing radiotherapy, you have to consider mammogram in 6 months, then annually. So that's a short summary of this early breast cancer. So as time limited, I would like to finish my presentation here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hari Krishna. Before question from audience, I need to give a little bit update about our MDT meeting at Teaching Hospital Batticaloa. We started a multidisciplinary tumor board meeting in 2016, Teaching Hospital Batticaloa, with the presence of almost all relevant consultants, histopathologist, radiology department, chemical pathologist, surgeons, and so on. We included all the peripheral surgeons to our WhatsApp group for last 5 years. But unfortunately, so far we haven't got any referral for MDT meeting before going into a definite treatment. We don't know, there may be some practical reason we can rectify it to improve our treatment. That's one thing. Second thing is, we have several shortcomings in the management of early breast cancer in our region. One of the problem we are having about performing immunohistochemistry studies. I think Dr. Ahilan must be here. We are trying for so many years to establish a immunohistochemistry lab in our hospital. So far, we couldn't make it successful due to several reasons. Another reason, because immunohistochemistry is very important to subtype in current classification. Those days, everyone must be aware that breast cancer, we are dividing ER positive, PR positive, HER2 positive, HER2 negative. Now, not so. Now it's a luminal type, basal type, HER2. So for all these classification, we need immunohistochemistry studies. That's one. Second thing is about staging, whether to give neoadjuvant chemotherapy or not, depend on the staging. For staging, we need radiological staging, we need ultrasound scan and CECT, because there are so many, in the sense there's a delay in our hospital because of patient overload to perform the staging at time in the sense of appropriate time. Another problem is, everyone aware that mammogram, we are having mammogram, but we are underutilizing in our hospital mammogram due to manpower issues. So even if we, I think Dr. Hari Krishna explained about the management of early breast cancer, ideal way, a book has been released. I think oncosurgical team, oncology and other specialties for the guide or guideline for the Sri Lankan. But we can't implement it successfully due to this problem. Other thing is even early breast cancer, HER2 or triple negative, we need to give neoadjuvant chemotherapy. But we are in a dilemma to go straight away surgery or this. These are the practical issues we are having at Teaching Hospital, Batticaloa. I think in the future, we will be able to give a good service according to the guideline.
One question from ourselves to Dr. Priyanka. You're talking about removing roadblocks. How can you advocate intermittent fasting? First question is intermittent fasting in at present date to the population. Is there any practical way? Second thing, there are a group of people who says no point of living without eating McDonald's chicken. How can we tackle this group?
We have to change the minds of the people. Nowadays, the people are more in the internet and they have found these types of fasting and all from the internet itself. We have to educate our population that from that only we can implement that from the GP system. From the primary care level, we have to implement these fasting systems and dietary systems.
Do we think that we have to tell the people to follow the Kanda Sasti, Kauri Kapu and Saturday fasting and all?
Actually, our ancestors have already practiced this intermittent fasting. As Sir has mentioned, all these viradams and all are actually telling intermittent fasting. If they can continue that thing, we can achieve this, I think. But there are a lot of practical problems in that. If we can change from ourselves, the society will take us as a role model and they can also change their lifestyle, I think.
What about the second question?
So, yeah, the KFC chicken and all. Yeah, they can have some cheating days, but actually the cheating days they are actually cheating themselves, not the others. If they are going to cheat them, ultimately they will face the results of that.
Thank you.
Shall I ask a question from Priyanka? Because now the student population, the schools, obesity or overweight percentage is going up, early diabetes and so on. We have been talking this issue for long years. Are there any suggestion to give for the audience and the principals or health related, educational higher officers, how to minimize or control this issue?
We have to conduct clinical meetings and workshop seminars on these topics because the change should start from the higher level. If we can educate the people above, the principals, teachers and all, they can themselves educate the students, I think.
Due to the time constraint, there are questions for Hari Krishant as well. We'll ask you later. We'll move on to the next session. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for both the panelists for their great contribution. And let me invite our chairpersons, Dr. Iqbal and Dr. Arulnidhi, to hand over the certificates for our panelists for their valuable contribution. Dr. L. Priyanka. Dr. L. Hari Krishnan. And now I call upon the President of the Batticaloa Medical Association to hand over the certificates of appreciation to our beloved panelists, beloved chairpersons, Dr. K. Arulnidhi and Dr. Iqbal. Thank you very much, sir.